Jamie was in hiding. She had been the only eyewitness to a high-profile murder a few weeks ago. The police had put Jamie in protective custody until the trial, but the killer had found out where they had hidden her and sent someone to make sure she didn't appear in court. It had been just blind luck that Jamie happened to glance out the attic window and see 3 men sneaking up the hill behind the house where she was supposed to be safe. She had been looking around at the old things that were stored in the attic when she had come across a small hidden cubbyhole behind a big chest. She would have never found it had it not been partially open when she moved the chest over by the window, so she could get a better look at the things stored in there. She peered inside and saw an old rag doll, a stuffed bear that had seen better days, and there was a little dollhouse as well as some paper and crayons. She could see something shiny in the back and crawled inside to see what it was. She was able to crawl on her hands and knees and even had enough room so that she could sit with her legs folded and her shoulders slumped over to keep from cracking her head on the ceiling of the little room. It was a small silver locket with an old picture of a man and woman inside. This must have been the parents of the little girl this necklace probably belonged to, she thought. She managed to turn around and, still clutching the locket, crawled back out into the attic room. She walked over to the attic window so she could get a better look at the locket when she glanced outside and saw the men climbing up the hill. She ran over to the pull-up ladder and hollered down at the 3 men whose care she was in, telling them about the 3 men. One of the men came to the ladder and told her to pull it up and stay put. Then she saw him hurry towards the back of the house where the kitchen was. She was scared to death. How had they found her? Nobody was supposed to know where she was except for the men downstairs. 3 men in the Justice Department and the captain of the men downstairs. What if they managed to get inside the house? She looked around her quickly. Her footprints were all over the place where she had walked in the thick dust that was on the floor. She grabbed one of the old blankets she had found up there earlier that day and hurriedly swished it back and forth across the floor, wiping out all of her footprints. That was a stupid thing to do, she realized as the dust was floating around in the air. Anyone coming up there to look would know that someone had been there and was probably still there. She glanced over at the wall where the little hidden room was and quickly crawled back inside, closing the door behind her. She jumped, hitting her head on the ceiling of the little room when she heard gunshots. They seemed to go on forever before the noise stopped. She hadn't realized how badly she had been shaking until the house became quiet again. She could hear the drop-down ladder being lowered, then heard footsteps walking around in the attic. "She's not up here," she heard someone yell. Then there was another voice saying that she had to be hiding up there somewhere. She heard things being tossed around, then held her breath when she heard a voice close to her hiding spot. "I'm telling you, the bitch isn't here. They must have moved her, or this was just a diversion. Shit, the boss is going to be pissed. Maybe she got out when we were busy with the cops downstairs. She's probably hiding out in the woods somewhere. Come on, let's fan out and see if we can find out if she was here or not. You two check the woods, and we will look around the grounds to see if we can find a trace of her. But I have the feeling this was all a setup for our benefit, and she was never here to begin with. What about all those women's clothes and shit in the bedroom? She must have been here. That shit could have been staged so that we would think she was here. Screw it, just go take a look in the woods and we'll check outside." Jamie could hear them climbing back down the ladder, but she didn't move. She wasn't sure that one of them hadn't stayed behind just in case she was hiding where they couldn't find her. She wasn't sure how many hours had passed, but she still stayed locked in the little room. No one would know anything was wrong till morning anyway, when the men were supposed to make a check and call to their captain. Then she knew someone would come and check to see what was the matter, then she could safely leave the little room. She was tired and drained. She grabbed the little teddy bear and rag doll, making herself a little pillow. She was able to lay down and stretch out her legs. She didn't even remember closing her eyes until she woke up needing to use the bathroom. She had no idea how long she had been sleeping, but her bladder needed to be emptied soon, or she was going to have an accident. Carefully, she opened the hidden door just a crack, listening to see if she could hear any sounds coming from downstairs. It must be morning, she thought, because she could see that the room was lit with the morning sunlight coming through the only window. Carefully, she crawled out of her hiding space and quietly took a few steps over to the window so she could look outside. She looked as far as she could in all directions, but saw nobody outside. The ladder was still in the down position, and she peered slowly over the edge to see if she could see anyone moving around down there. She saw the blood first, then she saw Bill's body laying in the corner where he had been shot and killed. She had to grab her mouth and fought to keep the puke from spewing forth. She climbed down the stairs trying to make as little noise as possible just in case someone was still around. She was careful not to step in any of the blood that was all over the place. She made her way over to where Bill was and checked to see if he had a pulse. No pulse. Bill was dead. She felt the bile rising in her throat again, then bolted out the front door where she emptied the contents of her stomach in the bushes by the porch. When she had calmed down enough, she made her way back inside the house to check on the other two men. She found them both laying in pools of blood in the kitchen. She checked to see if they had a pulse and was saddened that both men were dead. She knew that Tom had a family with 2 small children. These men had lost their lives trying to protect hers. She made her way into the bathroom where she emptied her bladder and washed her face with cool water. She sat down on the edge of the tub and cried. After she had a good cry, she glanced at her watch to see what time it was. 10 o'clock. Why hadn't anyone come to check on the men to see why they hadn't made their morning call? What was going on? Her heart began to race again. Something was terribly wrong with this whole situation. Jamie took a deep breath to clear her head. She needed to think, and she had to be level-headed to figure this out. The men who had killed the cops guarding her had known where to find her. That meant someone had told them where she was. Only 7 people knew where Jamie was hidden, and 3 of them were dead. That left the 3 men in the Justice Department and the police captain whose men lay dead outside the bathroom. One of the remaining 4 had to be working for the man she was supposed to testify against. That was the only logical answer as to how the killers had been able to find her. Jamie no longer felt that she would be safe if she remained in police custody. She had been an only child. Both of her parents had died years ago. She had been married for a short time, but the marriage had ended over 13 years ago. She had no family, so there was no one they could go after to try to buy her silence. The only choice they had was to silence Jamie. She realized the only person she could trust now was herself, but what was she going to do? She wasn't rich, so she couldn't just up and leave the country secretly. She had very little cash on her, and she knew they could trace her if she used her credit card. She also knew that if she called anyone, she would have to use one of the cell phones you could buy in most department stores, so the call couldn't be traced. Thank God she watched a lot of those crime scene shows on TV. She knew what not to do to keep from being traced. It was almost 11 o'clock, and still no one had showed up to check on the men. She knew time was running out and hurried to the bedroom to change into some clean clothes. She folded the dirty clothes she had just taken off and put them into the dresser so it would look like they hadn't been worn. She grabbed an extra pair of jeans and a clean t-shirt, then headed back up to the attic to wait. She stood back from the window so she couldn't be seen from the outside, but still able to see the long drive that led up to the house. About a half hour later, she saw a car coming up the drive. 2 men got out of the car and headed towards the house. Jamie crawled back into the cubby hole and quietly waited. She could hear their voices downstairs, then she heard someone coming up into the attic. She sat very still, making sure that she wouldn't make any noise that might give away her hiding place. I'm telling you, she was here. She hadn't been moved. At least to my knowledge, she hadn't. She probably got away while your men were busy killing everybody downstairs. She had heard that voice before, but she couldn't put a face to it. We better leave and make the call. It will look suspicious if no one checks on this place. Get your men to come back tonight after dark and have them search the woods again. No, better forget that. They might leave guards here tonight. We will just have to think of another way to find her. She heard them climbing back down the ladder. A few minutes later, she heard the car engine start up. She crawled out of the little hiding space and went to the window to see that both men were in the car backing down the driveway. She didn't have much time. She knew someone was going to be sent to check on the men shortly, and she needed to be away before they came. She was going to have to change her appearance of that, she was positive. She knew the only way she could get away from here quickly was to use the car that the men had used to drive her up here. She had to go through Bill's pants pockets to find the keys to the car, and felt sickened once again that this man had lost his life because of her. She grabbed her purse and the extra set of clothes, then ran to the garage to get the car out. She hoped it would be some time before someone noticed that there was no car there before they put out an all-points bulletin on it. She spied a ball cap hanging on a hook in the garage and grabbed it. She piled her long brown hair up under the cap, then backed out of the garage. She had to get back out to go close the garage door and hurried as fast as she could. She made sure she obeyed the speed limit, not wanting to get pulled over and possibly found out. She drove to the next town in the opposite direction of the police station where she had been given over to the 3 men who had died trying to protect her. Her mind was working overtime trying to figure out her next move. She had to get rid of the car first. She saw the signs for a hospital and headed in that direction. She parked the car in one of the parking ramps, then walked back down to the main road where she took off on foot to find the nearest store where she could purchase some shears, hair dye, sunglasses, and a phone. She had only walked about a half-mile down the business area when she saw the huge Kmart sign up ahead. She figured if she had stopped into one of the smaller stores along the way, someone would be more likely to remember her. She hoped her chances of not being remembered in a busier store would give her the time she needed to decide what her next move would be. She made her purchases, then left to find a cheap motel. It was going to be a big waste of what little money she had left, but she didn't have any other choice. She only had a little over $100 on her after she had bought the things at Kmart. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her long brown hair was now just long enough to come almost to the top of her shoulders. Her brown hair was now blonde. She had activated the cell phone she had purchased with a $20 phone card, then picked up the phone book on the bedside table and began looking through the yellow pages for a private detective. She found one in the yellow pages whose listing said he was bonded and state licensed. She dialed the number and was surprised when she heard a deep voice on the other end of the line. She told him what she needed and gave him no other information, telling him she would explain when they met. He told her he would be in his office for another hour and would wait for her. She checked the address that was listed in the phone book and knew she would never be able to walk that far in that short of time. His offices were located on the far side of town. "Look, I don't have a car and I don't dare call a cab. Could you please meet me outside of the 10th Street Park?" Galen was intrigued by the caller. He could hear the fear in her voice and knew that whatever it was that had her so frightened was real. He asked her how he would recognize her and told her that he would be there in 20 minutes. He told her what he was wearing so that she would know it was him when he came to the park. Jamie hurried up and cleaned up the room, wiping her fingerprints off of everything she had touched. She grabbed the small garbage bag she had taken out of the small can in the bathroom, then headed out the door. 10 minutes later, she was sitting on one of the park benches waiting for the detective to arrive. She had tossed the garbage bag into one of the trash containers in the park that had her hair that she had cut in it and the contents of the dye box. She left nothing to tie her to ever being in the motel room. She recognized him from his description as he walked towards her. He was tall, around 6'3" or 4" she guessed. He must be around 40 or so with coal black hair. When he stood in front of her, she could see that his eyes were a warm shade of jade. He was damn good looking, she couldn't help but notice. "Hello, I'm Galen Smithers." He introduced himself, offering her his hand. "Jamie Carlson," she said, shaking his hand. Jamie Carlson, the woman whose face was plastered all over the evening news. She had changed her looks, he noticed. The woman's picture on TV was of a middle-aged woman with long brown hair. She was in real trouble, according to the evening news. "Miss Carlson, if you would tell me what it is you're looking for, we can go on from there." "I need protection, Mr. Smithers. I was the only witness to a murder a few weeks ago and was put under police protection until the trial. Early yesterday afternoon, 3 men came to the house where I was being kept and killed the 3 officers who were there to protect me. How come they didn't find you? If you were there to witness those murders." That morning, I had found a small hidden cubby hole in the upstairs attic while looking at all the old things that were stored up there. I happened to glance out the attic window and saw 3 men with guns sneaking up the hill behind the house. I called down to the officers, telling them what I had seen. They told me to pull up the ladder and stay put. I looked at the opening to the cubby hole and decided to hide in there. That was smart thinking, Miss Carlson, and probably the only reason you're still alive. I would have never found the hiding place had it not been open to begin with. It was designed to not be noticed when the opening was closed. When the first shot rang out, I was scared to death. I have no idea how much time had passed until the shooting stopped. You said there were 3 men? I only saw 3, but there was at least one other. When they found their way into the attic, I could hear their conversations clearly. Jamie told him what the killers had said and how she knew that one of the 4 men alive who knew where she was had to be working for the man she was going to testify against. "Come on, Miss Carlson, I'm going to take you back to my office where I can make a few calls until we decide what to do," he said, holding his hand out to help her up. "Please call me Jamie," she said, taking his hand. Galen helped her into his car, then headed back to his offices. Everyone had gone home for the night, so Jamie wouldn't be seen by anyone when they entered the building. He took the tapes out from the surveillance cameras and erased the tapes. He got a cup of coffee for Jamie, then set about making a few calls to contacts of his. Jim, find out all you can without asking any questions. I don't want anyone to be able to trace her back to me, okay? Call the office when you find anything out. I'll be here for another couple of hours at least. Jamie had been watching the TV while he was on the phone and turned white as a ghost when she heard the bulletin about her. They had her listed as a missing person, asking anyone with information to her whereabouts to call a hotline number that was flashing on the bottom of the screen. Nothing was said about the officer's missing car, so maybe they hadn't found it yet. She knew it was only a matter of time when they would. A half hour later, the phone rang, and it was the man Jim who Galen had first called when they had gotten to his office. Listen, buddy, I'm not sure what is going down, but it's something big. One more thing. I think all the phones here have been tapped, so if you know anything about this woman, I suggest you hightail it out of there before you get some unwanted company. Galen grabbed his coat and his gun, then ushered Jamie out of the office as quickly as he could. What's wrong? Where are we going? I've got to get you someplace safe, Jamie. I'll explain it all when I'm sure we're safe. They drove out of town to a small house just outside the city limits. He pulled the car into the drive and pushed the button on his visor to open the garage door. He jumped out of the car, telling her to stay there. He backed an older pickup out, then put his car in the garage. He told Jamie to get into the truck, then he headed out of town. They had been driving for about an hour when he finally spoke to her. Jamie, did you witness the murder of Judge Templeton? Yes. How did you know? I didn't, but it was the only logical answer to why someone would be trying to kill you. His murder was the only high-profile murder that would have the Justice Department involved with hiding away a witness. Look, we have a long way to go yet, so why don't you try to get some sleep? We can talk when we get to where I'm taking you. Jamie was tired. She felt relaxed in the company of this stranger, but more importantly, she felt truly safe for the first time in weeks. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. Wake up, Jamie, we're here. She opened her eyes to see Galen leaning over her. She jumped, coming alert instantly. Come on, let's get inside and I'll make us something to eat, then we can talk. The car had been parked in a big 3-stall garage. He led her to a door, then held it open for her to enter before him. She was in a good-sized room that had 2 benches on both sides of the door and a large coat rack. She guessed this must be some sort of mudroom where you could take off your wet shoes or boots before going into the main house. Another door led them inside the house, where they entered through a huge kitchen. She hadn't even seen the rest of the house, but knew she was in someone's home that definitely spoke of money. Lots of money. He led her through the kitchen into a huge living room that had windows from floor to ceiling on 2 sides that overlooked a huge lake on one side and a woods on the other. There was a huge fireplace in the center of another wall that he was busy starting a fire in. The room was beautiful and large. There were 3 huge sofas, 6 big overstuffed chairs, 2 big screen TVs on opposite ends of the room, end tables with beautiful lamps that had beautiful cut glass lampshades on them. The only thing that seemed out of place in the room was an old rocking chair over in the corner by the fireplace, facing the window that looked out upon the lake. There was a small basket full of balls of colored yarn sitting beside the chair. That was a grandmother's chair, Jamie was positive, maybe even a chair of a mother. That was my grandmother's chair. She would sit there for hours knitting and watching us kids swim in the lake. Jamie just noticed the beautiful blanket hanging on a rack beside the chair. Did your grandmother knit that as well? She asked him. Yes. It was the last thing she made before she passed away, sitting in that chair. Jamie watched as he reached down and gently ran his fingers over the blanket hanging on the rack. You must have loved her very much, she said softly. Yes, we did. Grandfather and her showed us nothing but love and kindness after our parents died. Grandmother rather spoiled us shamelessly, though, he said with a loving smile in his eyes. You were lucky to have had them. Mine died when I was a baby, so I never got to know them. My parents died when I was 20, leaving me an only child with no family. I'm sorry, Jamie. Every child should have grandparents to spoil them. How many kids in your family? I have 2 brothers and 1 sister who was spoiled way more than the rest of us, let me tell you. She was Grandpa's little angel, and us boys were always getting a talking to if we picked on her. Jamie wondered how come someone who obviously had money would choose to be a private detective. He was well-dressed and polished, and looked like he would be more suited to hanging with the rich and famous instead of being a private detective. "Where are your brothers and sister, if that's not too personal of a question?" she asked him. "Both of my brothers run two of our grandfather's companies, one in England, one here in the States, and my sister heads up the advertising company in New York. I was the black sheep of the family, so to say. I always had a head for puzzles and used to spend most of my time reading mysteries. Working in the companies bored me to death, the same thing day after day. So I decided to do something I enjoyed and also happened to be good at. So I opened my own detective agency." He had such a nice voice, deep and sexy. She bet he could make a woman excited when he turned on the charm. She hadn't noticed a ring on his finger, but in today's world that didn't mean he wasn't married either. "Enough about me. Let's make us some sandwiches, then we can talk about your case. I can't offer you any milk until I get some from the store. I didn't want to stop while you were in the car in case anyone might notice you. I do have soda, coffee, tea, or bottled water." They made their sandwiches, then went back into the living room where they sat on one of the sofas with their drinks and began to talk about her case. Jamie had told him everything she remembered and how she happened to be a witness to the judge's murder. She was a smart woman. She had covered up her trail as good as any good detective would have done. He had marveled at how she had even gotten rid of her hair she had cut and the dye by not leaving them in the motel. No one would know she had changed her looks, and odds were that no one would remember her along with all the other female shoppers who had purchased hair dye at the Kmart that day. "You're positive that you recognized one man's voice?" "Yes, I just can't put a face to it though." "You're a smart woman, Jamie. I think you're correct in assuming that one of the four men left is working for someone other than the Justice Department." Jim couldn't find out any details, but he said something big was going down, and he told me he thought that all the phone lines had been tapped. "So the chances are that someone will be looking me up." "When is the trial scheduled?" 6 weeks from tomorrow. "Do you think you can keep me hidden that long?" "Yes, Jamie, I can. I won't buy more than what one person would need when I go to the store. The freezer is fully stocked, as is the pantry, so food we have plenty of. You can use my sister's toiletries that she has here when she comes to visit. As far as clothes go, I'm afraid you're going to have to live in sweats and t-shirts for the time being. That's okay. At least I feel safe, and I haven't felt that way in weeks. Come on, I have something to show you that you will need to know." He led her back into the kitchen and into the huge pantry. "Do you know what a safe room is, Jamie?" "Yes, I've heard of them. Look here, there is a small button on the back of this shelf. Push it." Jamie did as he instructed. When she had found the button, the shelf moved quietly forward, then opened up, exposing the hidden room. Galen led her inside and showed her what was in the room. There were 6 surveillance camera monitors that showed the outside of the house and the garage. On the other wall, there were a dozen more monitors that showed every room in the house. "All of these have sound as well, Jamie, and no one outside the room can hear anything going on in here. The walls are 3 feet thick and solid steel. You have a first aid kit here along with aspirin, peroxide, some antibiotic cream, and so on. This is the toilet. It is separate from the house, and even when it's flushed, there is no sound that can be heard in the other pipes of the house. The pipes and water for it are located between sheets of steel in the foundation of the house." "How does air get in here?" she asked him. "There is an air pipe located on the grounds that is hidden in some rock piles. It is covered and screened so nothing can block air from getting in. Even if you knew where to look for the pipe 9 out of 10 times, you would never find it. It is hidden that well." "What's in here?" she asked him, pointing to some covered containers. "In this one you will find dried fruits, jerky, canned meats, and such. This is a small refrigerator where your bottled water is kept. In that container over there you will find a big air mattress and some blankets in case you should ever have to spend the night in here. There is a foot pump with the mattress if the compressed air tank doesn't work to blow up the mattress." Jamie was impressed. She could hide in here for weeks if she had to and be comfortable. "Jamie, the most important thing to remember when you come into the room is to lock the door from the inside. Once the door is locked from the inside, even if someone found the button to open it, it wouldn't engage. You have to remember, as soon as you come inside, hit this button to close and lock the door. To open it, you have to push this green button over here." "Does that phone work?" she asked him. "Yes. In case the power is somehow lost to the phone, there is a cell in that small drawer that I keep plugged in at all times so that it is fully charged." He opened the drawer, showing her the phone and also a small revolver. "I keep the gun loaded, Jamie. If the lights go out, there is a backup generator that will kick everything back on. But on the off chance that doesn't work, there is a flashlight with extra batteries here. And see these 3 lights on the wall here? They are battery operated. All you have to do is push on the lens to turn them on or off. I don't know how to thank you, Galen. I can't pay you, but I will make sure the Justice Department takes care of your bill when this is all over. Galen noticed the tears forming in her bright blue eyes, clouding them over, and he had the uncontrollable urge to gather her in his arms and let her have a good cry. He gathered her in his arms and held her tight to his chest. It's all right, Jamie. I'll keep you safe until this is all over. You don't have to worry anymore. Jamie let the tears gush forth. She couldn't hold them back any longer. She wrapped her arms around Galen, feeling safe inside his arms. When she had stopped crying, she realized what she had done and gently withdrew from the comfort of his arms. Come on, there are a couple more things I need to show you. He led her out of the room, closing the door to the safe room before they left the pantry. He took her back into the living room and picked up one of the remote controls laying on the coffee table. Jamie, my entire property has security of some sort or another to keep out unwanted guests. If you noticed when we came inside that I punched some keys on the keypad by the back door, that not only kept the silent alarms from going off, but it also set the infrared security around the property. Anyone trying to sneak onto the property will set off the silent alarms here in the house. This TV will automatically come on, showing the area that was breached and who or what had set it off. My God, this must be like the security used for Fort Knox or something, she said jokingly. I have hundreds of hidden cameras around the property, Jamie. Even if someone managed to turn off the security, they would have to shut down more than a dozen separate terminals at the same time around the property. If the power was off, the TV would still show where the breach was made, and the alarms in here would go off. Only someone in the house would be able to hear them. The TV will sound off 3 loud beeps alerting you to a breach. I bet you must have a fun time every time a wild animal comes on your property. Not really. The beams won't react to anything under 100 pounds. Deer will set it off now and then, but I would rather reset the alarm than take any unwanted chances. As if on cue, the alarm went off with the TV making 3 loud beeps. Jamie almost jumped out of her skin when the TV went off. The picture on the TV showed a mother deer and her fawn eating grass. Their combined weights and them being so close to each other had set off the alarm. When that happens, just press this key, then punch in 5, 1, 1, 5, 1 and everything will reset. You don't even have to go back to the main keypad to reset the alarm. The TV in my room and my sister's room are also hooked up to the system. I'm going to put you in my sister's room, so you will be able to see right away what is going on when the alarm trips. I have 10-foot-high fences all around the property, but now and then a deer or two will manage to jump over it. They talked a little more about her case, then Galen suggested they get some sleep as it was getting late. He showed her to her room and where she could find the sweats and t-shirts. She took a shower before she settled down for the night. She was wearing one of the t-shirts he had provided as a gown. She lay in bed for some time before sleep finally overtook her. She woke up to someone shaking her. She was sweating and shaking. Jamie, you were having a nightmare, Galen said with his hands on her shoulders. I remember now. It was the blood and seeing Bill's body covered in it. He died to protect me, Galen. Tom had a wife and 2 children, and now they have been left without a father because of me. She was crying again. Galen sat down on the side of the bed and took her in his arms to try to comfort her. Jamie, there was nothing you could have done to save them. They knew the dangers of the jobs they held, and by giving their lives, they became heroes to those in the profession and to their families. Please don't leave me. I'm afraid of being alone. Could you please stay here until I fall asleep again? She asked him, wiping the tears from her eyes. Galen lay down beside her and took her in his arms, cuddling her head against his chest. Of course I'll stay. Go back to sleep, Jamie, you're safe now. Galen was strangely taken by this woman. He liked the smart way she had thought out her escape, that told him that even in a crisis she managed to think with a level head no matter how scared she had been. There was also something vulnerable about her that made him want to shelter and protect her. The blonde hair she now had suited her more than her natural brown had. Her brown hair would have suited her more had she had some bronze highlights in it, he thought. She had a pretty round face with the bluest eyes he had ever seen on anyone. Unusual for someone with brown hair to have blue eyes, so it must have been a trait she had inherited from one of her parents. Galen stared down at her as she slept, She had full lips, the kind you just wanted to kiss. She trusted him to keep her safe from harm, and here he was wanting to kiss her. She was sleeping. He should leave right now before any more lustful thoughts entered his head. It had been months since he had been with a woman. His thoughts drifted to Mary. She was a beautiful woman and could have graced the cover of any fashion magazine. But she was also a gold digger. He had married her thinking she loved him as much as he had her at the time. Within a few months he learned better. The only thing she loved about him was his money and what it could do for her. The detective in him made him gather up some dirt on her before he filed for divorce. He wasn't going to let the bitch end up with half of his fortune if he could help it. She loved to tell her friends how she had tricked him into marrying her. He had gotten her on videotape 3 times telling different friends that little tidbit of information. He also got pictures of her with a male friend at a nearby motel. When he finally filed for divorce and went to court, she got nothing. When the judge handed down his judgment, she flew into a rage, throwing her lawyer's briefcase at him and calling him a rotten pig. Over the years he had become hard. He trusted no woman with his heart, and when one hinted around about them living together, he broke it off quickly. He dated a couple of women on a semi-regular basis, and they both knew the score. He wasn't interested in marriage nor living together. He closed his eyes, the smell of Jamie's hair the last thing he remembered before he fell asleep. In the morning, they found themselves in each other's arms. "Jamie, are you sure? I feel like I'm taking advantage of you." Jamie lay there looking into his eyes. It was more like her taking advantage of him. Men like Galen very seldom were attracted to women who looked like Jamie. She could see a tall, beautiful, young woman wrapped in his arms, a woman of breeding, from money. Not somebody who lived paycheck to paycheck, who worked a 40-hour week in a factory, someone who could model for one of those big, beautiful women catalogs. I don't know which one of us started this. We can blame it on the circumstances of us, just feeling like anyone else who might find themselves in the same circumstances that we were in last night. We can even blame it on the natural urges our bodies feel being this close to each other. It really doesn't matter to me the whys or wherefores of it. I just know it has been a very long time since I have felt desire or wanted to share it with someone until now. Galen rolled over onto his back, looking up at the ceiling. I understand that, Jamie, but I still feel as if I'm taking advantage of the vulnerable state you're in. Jamie leaned up on her elbow and looked down on his handsome face. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see that no matter what he said, he was still excited. She reached down, taking him firmly in her hand before she spoke to him. "I don't care, Galen. I won't feel guilty, and neither should you. You can put all the blame on me because I'm not willing to deny myself something that I very much want and need." She gave him no time to answer her as she turned her head towards him and kissed him. They made love. Galen was positive that the majority of people who had sex did not make love. Instead, they just made it as man and animals have done since the beginning of time. He hadn't made love to a woman since the first 3 months he was married to Mary. He had had sex with them, yes, but to make love to a woman, you had to feel love for her. Anything else was just lust and the need to release pent-up desire. Yet in all these years, he had never felt guilt until today. He couldn't fight the passion Jamie had instilled in him, but he still felt guilty about acting on those impulses and for enjoying them. They were both at it when the alarms went off in the house. Galen jumped up off of Jamie, and they both glanced at the TV to see what had set the alarms off. A black car was coming up the driveway, and Galen could clearly see 3 men in the car. "Hurry, Jamie, get in the safe room," he said, pulling her quickly to her feet. They hurried downstairs, where Jamie opened the door to the safe room while Galen waited to answer the door. Once she was locked safely inside, he went over to turn on the coffee pot. Whoever was coming, he wanted them to think he had just gotten up and was having his morning coffee. Jamie's heart was racing as she watched the monitors on the wall. She heard the doorbell ring, then watched as Galen moved from the kitchen to the living room entryway, where he opened the door to the 3 men standing there. "Galen Smithers?" "Yes, I'm Galen Smithers." The men flashed their badges at him, telling him they were from the Justice Department and wanted to have a few words with him. Galen invited them in and told them to follow him to the kitchen. He was telling them he had just gotten up and needed his morning coffee. He poured himself a cup and offered them one, which they declined. After he took a sip from his cup, he asked them how he could help them. "We know you have been in contact with this woman and that you called someone in our department making inquiries about her. Where is she, Mr. Smithers?" They had held up a picture of Jamie when they had asked him their questions, and Galen hadn't batted an eye. That's right. I called a friend in the department last night to see if he knew anything about her. She had come to my office earlier that day wanting to hire me, but she never told me her name. I told her my fee. She said she had no money right then, but would pay me as soon as I helped her. I gave her my card and told her to give me a call when she came up with the money, and she left. It wasn't until I saw that picture of her on the news last night that I found out who she was, so I gave my friend a call to see if he knew anything. What did she want to hire you for, Mr. Smithers? She said she needed me to check on somebody who worked for the Justice Department. That's all she said. Like I said, she didn't even tell me her name. What time did she come to your office, Mr. Smithers? I was just leaving for lunch and saw her heading for the building. I told her the office was closed until 2, and she would have to come back then. She asked who I was. I told her, and that's when she told me she wanted to hire me. So she never actually came inside the building then?
No.
You have surveillance tapes, correct, that can prove that? Yes, I do have surveillance tapes, but I erase them every night before I leave the office and set them for the next day. We'd like to take a look around, Mr. Smithers? Not unless you've got a warrant. You mind telling me what it is you think you might find here? I'll be back with a warrant. This said, they headed back to the front door. Galen watched them drive back down the drive, then reset the alarm before going to get Jamie. Did you recognize them, Jamie? No, I've never seen any of them. Only the one man spoke, so Jamie had no way to tell if she could recognize the other two's voices. Come on, we've got to hurry and clean up any signs of you being here before they come back. They made the bed and straightened up his sister's room. They wiped the bathroom shower area dry, so there were no signs of anyone having used it. Jamie took her clothes and put them in the safe room. Then they washed the dishes by hand and took care of them instead of using the dishwasher. Don't worry, Jamie. When they come back, which they will, they won't find any signs that you have been here. He had taken her in his arms, holding her shaking body close to his in comfort. I need a shower, she remarked. Jamie, you're going to have to take one with me, I'm afraid. We will have to dry off with the same towel because we can't take the chance of them finding more than one towel dirty when they know I only arrived here last night. He let her get out of the shower first so she could dry off. Even with both of them naked in the shower, neither one of them seemed to notice the other. They washed quickly so that Jamie would be back in the safe room before they came back. Galen knew they only had about an hour before the men would be back with their warrant, so they hurried to finish up. Jamie had just finished dressing when the alarms went off again. This time the black car was being followed by a police cruiser. Jamie was tucked safely away in the safe room by the time the men were knocking on his door again. Mr. Smithers, we have a warrant to search your home. The same guy who had done all the talking before had handed him the warrant and tried to push his way into the house. Hold on, buddy. You're going to let me read the warrant first before you go poking around my home. Before you say anything, fella, I do know the law, and I'm going to call my lawyer to go on the search with you. Frank, I have some men here from the Justice Department with a warrant to search my house. I need you to bring 4 other men with you and get over here as quickly as you can. This isn't helping you much, Mr. Smithers. Are you afraid we are going to find something? No, but you're not going through my home without my lawyer present to make sure you don't do anything outside the law or the confines of this warrant, officer. I suggest we sit outside on the patio while we wait for him to get here. He should be here within 20 minutes. Jamie could hear the entire conversations of the men and watched the monitor as they moved out to the patio to sit and wait for Galen's lawyer. When Frank arrived, the first thing he did was ask for the warrant. Which one of you is Officer Lance? I am. Your warrant says that you have the right to search the house and premises for a Miss Jamie Carlson. That means you may look for the presence of this woman, but you can't go tearing through Mr. Smithers' things. My men will accompany each of your men during your search to make sure everything is done correctly. This warrant does not give you the right to destroy or disrupt any of my client's personal property either, so make sure your search is done thoroughly, but without disrupting the condition of his home, property, or personal belongings or items. Is that understood, Mr. Lance? Perfectly. An hour later, the men and officers left without finding any trace of Jamie having been there. Even after the men had left, Jamie remained in the room per Galen's instructions earlier. He had told her not to come out for any reason until he came to get her himself. What's going on, Galen? Why do they think you know something about this woman? Galen told his lawyer friend the same story he had told the officers, leaving out the little fact that Jamie was indeed in his house under his protection. So she is the one who witnessed the judge's murder. No wonder they are hot to find her. There was something about that officer Lands that didn't sit well with me, Galen. I'm doing to do some checking on him as soon as I get back to the office. There is more going on here than them looking for a lost witness. Let me know if you find anything out in case she tries to contact me again. I better call June when I get back in case she gets wind that the Justice Department is after her big brother," he said, smiling and hugging Galen. "You just tell her that her little brother is making sure her big brother is safe from the nasty policeman when you do, brother." So Frank was his brother. No wonder they looked so much alike. When Jamie first got a good look at Frank, she thought to herself that he looked an awful lot like Galen, but dismissed that thought when she went back to paying attention to what was being said by the men. She wondered why Galen hadn't told his brother the entire truth. Galen was standing in front of the safe room door, giving Jamie the signal to open the door. "So Frank is your brother? How come you didn't tell him I was here?" "The less he knows, the less likely he will be in danger, Jamie. He can honestly tell anyone who might question him that he knows nothing other than being asked here by his brother to represent him. I don't know about you, but I'm hungry. We didn't get to have breakfast, and it's already 2 o'clock. I'll make us some soup, and you can put a salad together for us." After they had eaten, Galen showed Jamie his family albums and some of the blankets, pillows, and things his grandmother had made. He told her how each of his brothers and his sister all had some items of their grandparents as keepsakes. His grandparents had left the house to him. Of all the kids, Galen was the one who loved this house more than anything. Each of them had been left equal shares in their grandfather's businesses, and the small fortune they had made had been divided up equally between the 4 of them. None of them would ever have to work again and still be set for life. His brother Frank ran the legal end of the businesses, while his brother Tim ran the business in England. His sister June ran the advertising firm in New York that did all the advertising for her family's businesses, but had some very high-end clients in the fashion world and sports industry as well. June had never liked living in the country. She was a city girl at heart and loved living in New York. She would come spend a week or 2 here and there with Galen when she was trying to unwind from the busy hustle and bustle of big city life. They had been talking for hours about his family, then made dinner. They made sure they washed all the dishes and took care of them before deciding it was time to go to bed. Galen had a feeling that they were going to have a busy day tomorrow, knowing those justice guys were positive he knew something about Jamie's whereabouts. "Jamie, I think you should sleep in my room just in case someone comes snooping around. That way we won't have to worry about making sure June's room looks unused." "Okay. Besides, I wasn't really looking forward to sleeping alone. I'm afraid I won't wake up in time if the alarms go off." They headed upstairs to Galen's bedroom. He grabbed a t-shirt for Jamie to use as her night clothes and let her use the bathroom first. Jamie climbed into bed and waited for Galen to come out of the bathroom. Her heart was racing, thinking about sleeping with Galen again. She was still wound up from this morning's unfinished lovemaking session and was more than ready to resume where they had left off. Jamie could still feel his kisses, and she wanted more. Galen came out of the bathroom and walked over to a huge walk-in closet where he took out a blanket from one of the shelves. He reached down to his bed, grabbing a pillow, and headed for the huge couch that was sitting across the room. "What are you doing?" "I'm getting ready to go to sleep, silly. Why aren't you sleeping in your bed?" "Because I don't want to take a chance that what happened this morning might happen again." Jamie was about to say something, then decided she had just better keep her mouth closed. He had spoke devoid of any emotion when telling her that he was sleeping on the couch, so she figured what had happened between them that morning was not something he wanted to repeat. So she turned her back to him, said goodnight, then tried to fall asleep. He lay there watching her toss and turn in her sleep. Was she dreaming of the men trying to kill her, or was she dreaming of them making love again? He was never going to be able to go to sleep tonight. Galen had known that Jamie hadn't been with a man in years, and he had felt so guilty of the situation he let get out of control that morning. He decided the right thing to do was not let it happen again. She was a woman who needed to be made love to, and Galen knew she needed a lover. He somehow managed to control himself and was heading for the bed when the alarms went off. Jamie sprang to life, jumping out of bed and looking straight at the television that clearly showed 3 men with rifles heading to the back of the house. "Jamie, run! Get in the safe room!" Galen yelled at her, reaching for a gun that he kept in the bedside table drawer. They ran downstairs and Jamie made for the pantry, where she got inside the safe room, making sure to set the lock. Her heart was racing. Why didn't he come in with her, knowing that there were 3 of them and that they all had guns? She was frightened for Galen and what those men could do to him. Another security measure that Galen had in his home was that he could turn his windows to a smoky gray at night to give him privacy from the outside world. He could look out, but no one could look inside at the same time. All his doors were steel with wood panels to look like wooden doors, so they could not be kicked in. He had just realized that the one security measure he should have, but didn't, was bulletproof glass windows. As soon as this ordeal with Jamie was over, he was going to change that. He watched as the men first tried to break into his home by trying to pick the lock on the door. When they finally realized the door also had deadbolts, they fired at the windows, then rushed inside. One guy made a beeline for the upstairs, running right past where Galen was hidden behind the grandfather clock. One shot and Galen took him out. Galen glanced at the television just in time to see another man out front aiming at one of the living room's windows. This guy came in fast, rolling on the floor with dead aim on Galen. "Drop it, buddy, or you're dead," he said with the rifle aimed right at his heart. Galen had no choice but to drop his gun. The other two men grabbed him and shoved him down into a kitchen chair and tied him up with his hands tied behind him. Jamie was watching all of this in horror as one of them grabbed a fistful of his hair, jerking his head back. "Where is she? We know you have her, or you at least know where she is. Make this easy on yourself and tell me where she is." Jamie watched in horror as the man punched Galen hard in the face, knocking his head to one side. "I don't know where she is. She never came back to my office." "You're lying. The janitor saw you bring her into the building and saw you leave with her. Now where the hell is she?" Hit punched Galen 3 more times, asking him the same question and telling him they had all night, so he might as well tell them now. Jamie heard every word he said and watched as he continued to try to beat her whereabouts out of Galen. One guy was holding Galen's head up while the other one was beating him. The third guy stood near the table with his rifle laying across his arms as he watched. The other two had laid their guns down on the table, so their hands were free to torture Galen with the beating they were giving him. Jamie couldn't let another man lose his life trying to protect her. She shook herself, trying to clear her head, and remembered the gun in the drawer. She didn't hesitate when she grabbed it and unlocked the safe room door. She closed the door behind her so that they still wouldn't know about the room before inching her way quietly to the pantry door. All she had to do was step through the door, and she would be in clear view of the 3 men. She put her hands around the gun like she had seen so many actors do in the movies and stepped out from her hiding place. "Drop it," she yelled with the gun pointed straight at the man holding the rifle. "Don't even try it. I'm a crack shot, mister, and I won't miss from this distance. Just lower your arms and let it fall to the floor." Galen couldn't believe his eyes. Jamie stood there looking every bit like some gangster ready to plug the first guy that moved. "Back up against the wall, all of you," she ordered. The men did as she ordered, but the one who had been beating Galen glanced at his gun on the table, and Jamie saw him. "You even look like you're going to reach for that gun, and you're a dead man. Now untie him," she said, moving closer into the room. Once Galen was untied, he grabbed the guns on the table and ordered the 3 men to lay on the floor on their stomachs. Jamie held the gun on them while Galen tied them up. Once he was positive they were tied good and tightly, he grabbed Jamie and headed for the garage. "Shouldn't we call the cops?" "We don't dare to, Jamie. We don't know how many men they have working for them here in town, and they might have my phone lines tapped." Galen was just climbing into the truck when a shot rang out. He turned and fired at the man leaning in the doorway, hitting him between the eyes. It was the guy he had shot. He had forgot about him. "Galen, you're shot." "Oh my God." Galen stumbled to the ground as Jamie ran around to help him to his feet. "Help me in the truck, Jamie. You're going to have to drive. I've got to get you to a hospital. Which way do I go?" "No hospital, Jamie. They will have to report a gunshot wound to the police, and we can't take that chance. At the bottom of the drive, turn right and head south." "Where are we going?" "To a friend's cabin. No one will know to look for us there. We should be safe there until we can figure out what to do." "Galen, we must take care of your shoulder." "We will when we get to the cabin. If I should pass out, Jamie, keep going on this road for about an hour until you see a sign that says Hickory Hills. Turn left at that sign and drive all the way down the road until you come to a dead end. There will be a small dirt road to your right. Take that until you come to the cabin. You can't miss it." Galen passed out a few minutes later. Jamie was terrified. What if he died? Should she ignore his orders and take him to the first hospital she came to? He was bleeding badly. She pulled the truck off to the side of the road and ripped the hem out from her shirt. She tied it tightly around his arm, making a tourniquet to help stop the bleeding, then returned to the road. There was the sign. She turned left and followed the road for about 3 miles before she came to the dead end. She saw the little dirt road on her right and followed it back into the woods until the cabin came into view. Some cabin, she thought when she saw the size of it. She parked the truck, then went around to the passenger side to try to wake Galen up and get him in the house. He came to, and she managed to get him inside and laid down on the couch. "Jamie, there is a first aid kit in the bathroom. Would you go get it, please?" She finally found the bathroom and headed back to Galen. "See that cabinet over there? It's a liquor cabinet. Go grab me a bottle of whiskey, Jamie." She handed him the bottle, and he took a huge drink straight from the bottle. "Listen carefully, Jamie. You're going to have to dig out the bullet. It's still in my shoulder. Don't talk, just listen to me, dear. When I've got enough whiskey in me, you're going to heat the blade of a knife from the kitchen and dig the bullet out of me. I will probably pass out at some point. So once you have the bullet out, clean the wound best. You can then heat the blade again and lay it over the wound to cauterize it. Bandage it up and wait for me to wake up again." "Galen, I can't do that. I know I can't." "Yes, you can. I know you can, Jamie. You're strong and I trust you." Only a strong woman could have come out of the safety of her hiding place to take on 3 armed men without thinking about herself. He took another couple of swigs of the whiskey while Jamie gathered up all the things she was going to need. She found the kitchen, grabbed the knife from the drawer, got a bowl of hot water, grabbed some clean towels from the bathroom, made sure the first aid kit was there beside everything else. She found a lighter that you use to start candles or a grill with to use to heat up the blade of the knife. By the time she was done making sure she had everything, Galen was good and drunk, having drank 3/4 of the bottle of whiskey straight. Even with all the whiskey in him, he screamed from the pain of the knife being shoved in his wound, then thankfully passed out. Jamie was crying so badly she was afraid she would never get the bullet out of him. She managed to dig it out, then quickly doused the wound with almost a whole bottle of peroxide before heating up the knife again to lay it across his wound to close it. She put some antibiotic cream on the wound and the bandages, then taped it down over the wound. She went into the kitchen and found the coffee and coffee pot and went to making a pot of coffee for when he woke up. She found some canned soup in one of the cupboards and got it ready to heat up when he woke up. She sat down on the floor beside him, wiping his face with a cool washcloth. She laid her head down next to him, holding his hand, and at some point she fell asleep. "Jamie, honey, wake up." Jamie opened her eyes to find Galen smiling down on her. "Did you get the bullet out?" She said nothing, but reached behind her, taking the bullet from the table where she had left it, and showed him. "I knew you could do it. Would you like something to drink? I have coffee made and some soup ready to warm up for you if you're hungry." "I'll take some coffee. I have one hell of headache from all that booze," he said, smiling at her tear-streaked face. Jamie went to get him a cup of coffee, making one for herself as well. "Galen, you could have died," she said softly after sitting down beside him on the couch. "But I didn't, Jamie. You made sure of that. Maybe I should give myself back up to the Justice Department. Maybe this time they can keep me safe if I demand all new officers. Jamie, if there is a leak in the Justice Department, nothing you can do will keep you safe from being found out. I'm going to call an old friend of mine to do some checking on those men who knew all about where you were being kept under guard. He is very experienced in this sort of thing, and he would not give away any information. I'm so tired of all this running, and I don't feel good about you getting hurt because of me. Look, let's talk about this in the morning. Right now I could use some of that soup you were talking about. How about you make us something to eat, then we can get some sleep. We will be perfectly safe here, Jamie, so we both can sleep without worry tonight." Jamie found some sliced ham in the fridge and made them both a grilled ham and cheese sandwich and bowl of soup. After she had cleaned up the kitchen, Galen led her into the only bedroom. He didn't even try to suggest that he sleep out on the couch. He gave Jamie a clean shirt from one of the dresser drawers and waited for her to come out of the restroom. Jamie climbed into bed beside him and lay her head down on his chest. She felt his arm wrap around her and pull her closer. She felt his lips lightly touch her forehead before she drifted off to sleep. Galen had fallen asleep shortly after Jamie, but had awakened a couple hours later. He tried to fight the urge to touch her, knowing that once he did there would be no turning back. Galen made love to Jamie the rest of the night, until they were both so exhausted they fell into sleep. Around noon they both awoke, Still holding each other in their arms, Galen suggested they shower. After taking their shower, they went downstairs in search of food. While they were eating, Galen made a phone call to the friend he had told Jamie about the night before. He gave him all the information and told his friend he would call that evening around 7 to find out what he had managed to uncover. He gave his friend the address of where they were in case he didn't hear from them by 7 that evening. They spent the rest of the day walking in the woods and even did some fishing in the lake at the back of the property. "You clean and I'll fry," Jamie told him, handing him the string of bluegills and sunfish they had caught. Jamie rustled around in the fridge and cupboards for something to eat with the fish they had caught. She made them a fruit salad with the cans of fruit she had found in the cupboards and found some potatoes in the pantry that she baked. The phone rang promptly at 7. Jamie listened as Galen just made yes and no answers. Then she heard him say they would see him when he got there. After he had hung the phone up, she asked him what his friend had said. "It's not good news, Jamie. He thinks he knows 3 people who are involved with what happened at the safe house. But he also said there are more people involved than what we thought. He said he has something for us to see and is on his way here. He was calling from his car and is going to stop along the way to exchange cars in case he has been followed." Jamie had heard Galen tell the man to bring him some penicillin for his wound, telling him that he didn't dare get an infection and become ill. Galen told her his friend should be there in less than an hour, so they sat around quietly waiting. They heard the sound of the motorcycle, and both of them jumped up, moving to the back of the cabin in case they had to make a run for the woods. They moved outside and were hiding behind the huge wood pile when the cyclist stopped behind the house. When the rider had removed his helmet, she heard Galen utter a huge sigh of relief. He told her it was his friend, and they left their hiding place to go meet him. "I couldn't take a chance on being followed, so I stopped at a friend's place. I parked the car in the garage and left the lights on in the house, then snuck out the back door. I pushed the cycle almost a half-mile through the woods before I started it up. I made the rest of the trip here, staying in the woods as much as possible." Galen led them back into the house where Jamie made some coffee for the 3 of them. "I'm Galen's friend Bill," he told Jamie, offering her his hand. He was a big man, not fat by no means, tall and muscular. He had to work out every day for that body, she was thinking to herself as she shook his hand. "Jamie, Galen told me that you recognized one of the killer's voices that killed the officers that were assigned to you, is that correct?" "Yes, but of the 4 men that I knew for sure that were there, plus there might have been more that I didn't see or hear, I didn't recognize their voices. I have some video that I managed to secretly get with audio that I want you to watch and see if you recognize anyone's voice or faces." The first 2 men on the tape she hadn't recognized, but the 3rd man was the voice from the house, who was one of the Justice Department men she had first met when she was being put in federal protective custody. She recognized 2 more men from the video, both from the Justice Department. When Bill had left the building, he had sat in his car in the parking lot with the video running, taking pictures of all the people coming and going in the building for the next hour. "Oh my God, that's my boss." One of the men coming from the building was her boss. A few minutes later, she recognized 2 co-workers, then 2 of her neighbors from her apartment building. "That would be normal, Jamie, for them to question people who knew you and might have some idea of where you may have gone," Galen explained to her. She had glanced back at the video and yelled for Bill to rewind the tape. She had recognized another man who had left the building. "I've seen that man before, I'm positive." She sat staring at the face frozen on the screen until it came to her. He was there the day of the shooting. He was leaning on the side of the pharmacy building reading a paper. I had glanced at him as I was coming out of the pharmacy, and I can remember seeing him folding the paper and tapping it against his leg, glancing across the street before walking in the opposite direction. Shit, I was afraid of that. He is a DEA undercover officer. The feds knew a hit was put out on the judge, but they haven't a clue how anyone could have found out the judge had been working undercover with the feds for months. I'd bet that this man is the reason the judge was found out. Bill, I have a feeling that the shooter isn't the person behind the hit on Jamie. Exactly what I was thinking when she recognized him. Hell, Galen, it's the men working for the DEA that have the hit out on her, and the only way we are going to be able to protect her is to find out just how many of them are involved and prove it. You mean the government is trying to kill me? Yes, hon. It sure looks like it's someone in the Justice Department and the DEA. Look, it's been a long day, and I think we should get some sleep and try to work out a plan in the morning after we've had a good night's rest. Galen hustled up an extra blanket and pillow for Bill, who was going to sleep on the couch. Galen had Jamie wrapped in his arms, holding her tightly. He would die to protect her. Galen knew he was falling in love with Jamie, and that love could either protect her or be a part of her downfall. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe from harm, including giving his life for her. He didn't make love to her that night, telling her that they needed a good night's rest so they could all think clearly in the morning. Jamie was the first one up the next day. She made her way to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. She had found some bacon frozen in the freezer the night before and had set it in the fridge to thaw. She found some pancake mix and syrup in the cupboards and went about making pancakes for the three of them. She fried the bacon crisp, then called the men to breakfast. Over breakfast, they talked about the options they had. "Okay, you'll go to town and pick us up some groceries. No one knows you, and if someone should ask what you're doing around these parts, just tell them you're on a cross-country trip and leave it at that. When I get back, I'll get a couple of guys I know that I can trust to do some more checking for me. I've 2 of those department store phones, so no calls I make can be traced. I'll leave one with you in case something happens and I don't make it back." Bill didn't have any trouble in town and got all the supplies they would need for the next couple of weeks. There was enough food in the freezer to hold them over for 6 months if need be. "One of my men is going to shadow the DEA agent and get all the dirt on him that he can. The other is going to make some discreet inquiries into the judge's death and just what it was that he had been doing for the DEA. I told them I would call tomorrow night around 6 to see what they have been able to come up with so far. Galen, we have got to find out just who we can trust. This is bigger than any of us thought." The judge was working for the Justice Department and DEA, trying to uncover how many corrupt agents were working together to traffic drugs with some of the big drug lords in Colombia, Brazil, and here in the States. Only 3 men knew he was working undercover, and they haven't been able to find out if it was one of the 3 who targeted him or not. Then Jamie wouldn't be safe with any of the branches until the day of the trial. Then we would still have to find a way to get her there safely. I've been thinking about this all last night when I couldn't sleep, and I think I have come up with a way to not only weed out the bad apples, but to get her into court safely as well. Jamie, for your benefit, even after the trial, it would be wise to go into hiding again. That's going to be the tough part of the whole thing. Getting you in for the trial will be fairly easy. It's getting you out that is going to be the difficult part. Well, what do you have in mind, Bill? We only have a week to pull it off before the trial starts. We've been lucky keeping her hidden all these weeks, but we're coming down to the wire, and we both know that whoever is behind this is stepping up ways to try to find her. For the past few weeks, they had worked hard trying to find out who all was involved with the judge's murder. The problem was the drug cartels themselves. They would do anything to keep her from being able to testify at the trial. They couldn't take the chance that she would only finger the guy who made the hit. They had to be sure that she didn't remember seeing the one agent there who gave the sign for the hit to take place. I have a good friend who I can trust with my life that works for the motion picture industry in California as a makeup artist. I'm going to get him here to put Jamie in disguise. When he gets done with her, no one will ever recognize her, and she can walk right in the courthouse unnoticed. Great idea, Bill. You're talking about Tim, aren't you? I trust him with my life as well. None better than Tim. Yes, it's Tim. Now here is what we have to do. I'm going to station 6 men around the courthouse the day of the trial. I'll have 2 on the ground that will be shadowing Jamie in case anything goes down while she is going in the courthouse or after she gets in there. I'm going to have them take her straight to the judge's chambers and stay with her so the judge can call her as a witness first. The other 4 men I'll have stationed on the rooftops of surrounding buildings, not only checking for snipers, but to have a good advantage point from above. Bill, if we can get her in the courthouse in disguise, why can't we get her out the same way? What do you have in mind, my friend? You said Judge Reynolds was presiding over the case and could be trusted, right? What if we get in touch with the judge and tell him that only he will know that Jamie is coming straight to his chambers and to keep that little piece of information under wraps? We can send Tim in the night before the trial to stay the night in his chambers so no one will see him go in. He can have a new disguise ready for Jamie, and we can get her out through his private entrance. Good idea, but it wouldn't be wise to have her go out the back way. Even in disguise, they might have someone waiting to plug anyone that might try to leave that way. She's going to have to go out the same way she came in, through the front doors, so as not to raise suspicion. Now, all we have to do is figure out how to disguise her. Guys, I have an idea that would be perfect. What do you have in mind, Han? Galen asked her, putting his arms around her, holding her tight. This is a big trial, right? There will be all kinds of media coverage and such. Can your friend disguise me as a male reporter? Excellent idea, Jamie. No one will be looking for a man, and going in as a reporter is the perfect cover to get you in the building. I have a friend who works for the New York Times, and I can get him to get us a real press badge, so no one will question your being there. We can't send her out as a reporter just in case someone is keeping tabs on how many reporters are there. If they are, they will come up one short when it's time to leave, so we have to think of a different disguise to get her out, Galen remarked. Bill jumped up from his chair at the table smiling and jumping around yelling, "I've got it. Oh my God, this is perfect. Just one small detail to take care of first, and then we will be set. Jamie, have no fear, no one is going to be looking for the person I have in mind." "Hell, Bill, tell us what you have in mind before we have a coronary," Galen yelled at him. Jamie will walk calmly out of the building as Judge Reynolds. He is about her height, and not to sound crude, Jamie, but he's good-sized, so no one will think to check on the judge when he leaves the building. Now, all I have to do is get Tim to get to the judge and make a cast of his face so he can make the mask. Bill called his friend Tim and told him what he needed. Tim was catching the next flight out and should be there in a few hours. Bill called his man Charles next and told him to get in to see the judge and tell him what the plans were and to be expecting Tim. They couldn't take a chance on calling him in case his phones were tapped, nor could he afford to take the chance on sending him a message by messenger. It had to be a face-to-face meeting, and not in the judge's chambers in case they had somehow managed to bug his offices or the courthouse. Charles called Bill back around 10 that night and told him everything was set. He had told the judge the details of how they were going to get Jamie there while in Charles's car. They went to a busy eatery for dinner, pretending they were old friends in case anyone had followed them. Charles was an old friend from college who was in town for the weekend and had looked his old college friend up to join him for dinner that night. Tim was going to be waiting for Charles, and the judge in the hotel room Charles had registered at before going to see the judge. Charles made sure that anyone who might be keeping tabs on the judge heard him asking the judge to stop by his suite to chat for a bit before he called it a night. He told Bill that Tim had made the plaster cast of the judge's face and trimmed a wig to be in the same color and style that the judge wore his hair. Everything was set. They had a damn good chance of pulling this off without worry. Galen had made love to Jamie every night since the first time they had gotten together, but this last week he had made love to her as if he might not ever get to touch her again. He hadn't told Jamie that he had fallen in love with her yet. He didn't want her mind to be clouded over with anything other than getting her safely in and out of the courthouse. They made love the whole week. When they woke up, he told her that when this was all over, he was going to get her back the same way she had him the night before. Tim arrived early to get Jamie in her disguise. Court was set for 11 o'clock, and it took him 2 hours to get her made up. When he was finished, she looked so much like a man it shocked her. That made her less nervous, because now she was sure she would get in the building without a hitch. Charles had met Bill a couple miles down the main road earlier last night to give him the reporter badge that Jamie would need to complete her disguise. Galen couldn't be seen anywhere near Jamie when they got to the courthouse, just in case someone would be watching if he arrived with anyone. Charles had left his car for Jamie to drive, and after getting to the courthouse, she parked in the area that was reserved for reporters and TV reporters. She was nervous when she walked into the building, but no one paid any attention to her. The back rows of the courthouse had been set aside for the reporters, and Court TV had been given permission to film the proceedings, so cameras were set up on both sides of the courtroom. Everyone had to go through 3 metal detectors before being allowed in the courtroom. The judge had ordered that no one other than his bailiff and the 2 court officers stationed at the courtroom doors could have a weapon in the courtroom, so all police officers had to check their guns in before being allowed into the courtroom. He had not allowed anyone other than the reporters into the courtroom, where he explained the rules of his court on how they would behave and what they could and could not do. No one was allowed to have cameras except the film crew, and all cell phones had to be checked outside so that no phone calls could be made or taken during the court proceedings, and no camera phones would be able to sneak some shots of what was going on either. He had made them all come and stand up by the door to his chambers while explaining this to them, and when he excused them to go back to their seats, Jamie was pulled into his office without anyone noticing her. The judge introduced himself to her, then showed her his private bathroom where she was able to take off her disguise. She had her blouse and slacks on under the suit she had been wearing and had gotten all of the glue off her face with Tim's help. He was there in the office where he had spent the night. He had everything ready to make Jamie up again as the judge after she had testified. She was going to have to stay in the judge's chambers until he dismissed court for the day. but the judge had told her and Tim that he was going to adjourn court until the following day after Jamie testified, so she could make her escape as quickly as possible. Galen was a nervous wreck. He wanted to be in the courthouse with Jamie, but they had decided if he showed up in court he might be followed if they thought he had anything to do with Jamie's appearance in court. "Your Honor, can I talk to you for a moment before this all starts?" "Jamie, does it have anything to do with what you're going to say in court?" "No, sir." "Good, because even I can't discuss this case with you before you testify." "Sir, there have been a lot of people who have worked to keep me safe until this trial that I can't pay for their services. I think the Justice Department should be made to pay their wages and expenses. Don't worry, young lady, I will make sure that all those involved will get paid. I'll even make them pay in cash here at the court, so no one can trace whose services you used." "Thank you, sir." "Okay, let's get this show on the road. Judge Templeton was a good friend of mine, and I want those involved in his murder to get what's coming to them." Jamie was shaking like a leaf on a tree on a windy day, waiting to be called in to testify. She could hear all that was going on in the courtroom from the judge's office. "Your Honor, the state would like to request an adjournment for a few days until we can find the whereabouts of our star witness." "That won't be necessary, Mr. Leeds. Your witness is here. Now please call your first witness." You could hear the astonishment of the people in the courtroom when the judge informed them that their witness was there. "Your Honor, the defense asks that you excuse yourself from these proceedings if you have been in contact with the witness without informing the state or defense of her whereabouts." "Mr. Wright, the witness came here of her own accord less than an hour ago and asked that she be kept protected until the trial began. I did not at any time know of her whereabouts, so your suggestion that I recuse myself is denied. Call your witness, Mr. Leeds." The state calls Jamie Carlson to the witness stand. When Jamie walked out of the judge's chambers, the whole courtroom gasped. She was sworn, and then the state began questioning her on the events the day the judge had been murdered. One man near the back of the courtroom had stood up and tried to leave, but the uniformed officers at the door wouldn't allow him to leave. The judge told him to sit down, that no one could leave the courtroom until court was adjourned. When the state prosecutor asked Jamie if the man she saw shoot the judge was in the courtroom, she pointed to the defendant and told him that was the man. "You are positive that this is the man you saw shoot and kill Judge Templeton?" "Yes, sir. Just before the judge had been shot, I saw that man over there fold his newspaper and tap it on his leg looking across the street. Then he turned and walked away. I turned to see who he was looking at because it just looked odd, and that's when I saw that man shoot the judge." When Jamie had pointed to the DEA agent, he tried to get up to leave, but the officers detained him and cuffed him. The first man who had tried to leave was pale as a ghost and nervous. The judge ordered him to be arrested as well, and both of them were sent to holding to be questioned about their involvement with this case. When it came time for the defense to question Jamie, the defense lawyer said he had no questions for her. The judge excused Jamie from the witness stand and told his bailiff to escort her into his office and get her safely out of the building. A few minutes later, the judge adjourned the trial until the following morning, giving the two lawyers time to have the two men being held questioned. The judge was in awe when Tim had finished making Jamie up. He couldn't believe how much she now looked like him. He had been thinking of how this woman could get out of the building safely while he watched her being transformed into his lookalike. "If I change my normal habits, someone is bound to notice, so I think you should take my car when you leave. You can call me later and let me know where my car is, and I'll have it picked up. Your friend and I will stay hidden in my bathroom for an hour. Then no one will think I'm here when they see you leave. Here is the key to my office door. Lock it when you leave, then turn right and go all the way down the hall until you come to the parking garage elevator. Take it to the top floor. When you get off the elevator, my car is the first one parked next to the elevator. You'll see my name on the parking space sign. I drive a silver Lexus. Press this key to unlock the car. Good luck, young lady. Have your friends contact me in a couple of days with their bill, and I'll make sure they are compensated for their time and work they have done. Thank you. You're supposed to call Galen when you leave, and he will tell you where to meet them." Tim handed her a cell phone, hugged her, and wished her luck. Jamie hadn't run into anyone when she was leaving the judge's office. She saw no one in the garage and didn't see anyone following her when she left the parking garage. She called Galen and told him she was driving the judge's car. He told her to meet him in another parking garage and to go to the third level of the garage where he would be waiting for her. After Jamie found Galen, she changed her outfit in the car before they left the parking garage. Galen had been keeping his eyes out to see if anyone may have followed her, but no one had. Tim had the foresight to know that he was going to have to disguise the judge, as well to get him out of the building after Jamie had gotten away. They had made their way outside without anyone paying one bit of attention to them. He drove the judge to where Galen had left his car, and the judge drove himself home in his own car. Galen's heart had slowed down once he had Jamie safely back with him. He had never been so scared in all his life as he was for the woman he loved who was sitting safely beside him, her head on his shoulder. He called his brother and told him to get contractors over to his place and replace all the windows in his house with bulletproof glass, and he wanted them all to have the same kind of privacy tinting. He told him he wanted it done by the end of the week. He said he would call him on Thursday to make sure it was done before he came back home. He told him he was taking Jamie back to where he had been keeping her until the end of the week, when he would bring her back to his house where he knew she would be safe once the house was full of bulletproof glass. Bill was waiting for them at the cabin. This wasn't over yet, and they had to make sure Jamie would be safe. Bill told Galen when they arrived that Charles had been in contact with the judge and gave him his cell number so he could get hold of Jamie when she would have to testify about the DEA agent. Bill waited until Jamie had gone upstairs to take a shower before talking with Galen again. Galen, remember that guy I pointed out that was picked up in front of the courthouse after the trial? Yes, the one that you called Jack about and told him to follow him. Did he find something out? Yes. He said there were 3 other men in the car, and they drove about 9 miles out of town to a deserted plastics factory. He had to call Larry to take over the tail because he was afraid they may have noticed they were being followed. Larry joined them 3 miles from where they finally turned off to the deserted factory. Jack had turned at the same corner Larry pulled out from so they could see he wasn't following them. I have a feeling you're going to tell me something I don't want to hear. After they turned off and headed towards the factory, Larry kept driving for about 1/4 of a mile before he found a spot where he could hide the car off the main road. He hiked back hoping they would still be there, and they were. He said they stayed inside the building for almost 2 hours. He taped them all leaving, said there were 8 men altogether. Charles brought me a copy of the tape a little while ago, and he took one to the judge. The judge might know some or all of the men on the tape. We can have Jamie watch the tape and see if she recognizes any of them. Have me watch what tape? Jamie asked, coming down the stairs to stand next to Galen. Galen told her about the man that was in a hurry to leave and how Bill had some of his men tail him to a deserted factory and managed to get the men on tape. Oh my God, that is the captain of the 3 men that were killed, she said, pointing him out on the video. Those 2 are 2 of the men I saw coming up the hill at the safe house, but I don't know any of the others. Good, now we know how they had found you, and I'm sure the judge will recognize him as well when he views the tape. I hate to say this, folks, but disguising Jamie isn't going to work a second time. These guys are smart, and they are going to be watching more closely all who enter the courthouse. We know they have a hit on her, and they could take her out inside or outside the courthouse. 9 times out of 10, they will use a shooter willing to take the rap like the one they had do the judge. I don't think so, Bill. I can't see them taking that kind of chance again, and there would be way too many witnesses. They would do it in a more subtle way. How do you think they would do it? They could be watching for every possible way into the courthouse and would probably have men stationed at all possible places looking for her. Once they found her, it would only take someone bumping into her, shoving a knife in her, or sticking her with some kind of delayed poison. Hell, there are any number of ways they could get to her. She has to testify. We can't just spirit her away and hope that she is never found. They have the money and resources to look for her for as long as it would take them, and you know that, Galen. Galen wrapped his arms tightly around her, pulling her close to him. Bill was right. They would never give up until she was dead. I've got to get her back to my place. I can keep her safe there, but I have to wait until the windows have been replaced. My brother is getting that taken care of for me, and should be done by Friday. We've got to keep her safe until then, and the judge can't set a trial for a couple of weeks. He has to give us time to keep her safe until we can figure out how we can safeguard her once she has to testify. Okay, I'll call Charles and tell him to get in touch with the judge and tell him our plans. Charles can tell him that he will get in touch with him on Saturday once you have her back at your place. They racked their brains every day and night the rest of the week trying to come up with some kind of plan and still hadn't managed to do that. Galen was getting frustrated. He had always been so good at figuring out puzzles, yet this was one he couldn't put together to keep Jamie safe. Jamie was watching TV, trying to keep her mind off the two men talking in the kitchen. She had heard something hit the wall earlier and wanted to see what had happened. Galen had tossed his coffee cup in frustration at the wall. She could see the anger written all over him. He was furious with himself that he hadn't been able to come up with some kind of plan. He had talked to his brother that morning, who told him the house was ready. They were leaving early in the morning. He wanted her back where she would have the safe room to be safe from any harm. She was flipping channels on the big screen TV when she happened across one of the news stations. It was at the moment when they were showing a suspect being arraigned for a series of robberies in some town that Jamie found the solution to their problem. "Galen, come quickly," she yelled at him. He was in the living room so fast, she compared his quickness to that of Superman. "What is it, Jamie? What's wrong, hon?" "Look at the TV. See that guy?" she said, pointing to the suspect on the screen. "Honey, what are you talking about? Do you know him? Is he one of the men who killed the police officers?" "No, but listen to me. I have an idea. See how he is sitting in a room all by himself. He is being arraigned for some robberies. If I have to testify again, why can't we find a way that it can be done on live video? That way I wouldn't even have to leave your house." Bill gave a big whoop and Galen grabbed her, lifting her off her feet and twirling her around. "You're such a smart woman. No wonder I love you." "What did you say?" She couldn't believe she had heard him correctly. "I said you're a smart woman." "Not that," she said, grabbing his arms and holding him tightly. "You said you loved me." Galen hadn't even realized he had professed his love to her until she mentioned it. Bill discreetly left the room, leaving them to their privacy. He knew his friend was in love with Jamie, and he thought she knew it before now. He smiled to himself as he poured himself another cup of coffee and sat down, patiently waiting for the all clear. "I do love you, Jamie. Couldn't you tell how much you mean to me? I've loved you for weeks, but didn't think it fair to cloud your mind with a declaration of love when you were so frightened for your life. I didn't want you to think I had taken advantage of a bad situation." Jamie reached up and kissed him passionately. She couldn't believe this wonderful man loved her. She knew she loved him and tried to fight it, thinking that when this was all over he would go back to his life and she to hers. She knew she would love him the rest of her life. She would always cherish the time they had together for as long as she lived. She never thought in her wildest dreams that he would love her the same way. After some time, they headed into the kitchen where Bill was waiting for them. "Well, now that we have declared our love for each other, we better figure out how we are going to do this," he said, smiling at the both of them. Bill called Charles and told him to get in touch with the judge and tell him their idea on how Jamie could testify in safety. Jamie hadn't let Galen make love to her last night, telling him she wanted them to be back at his home where they had been the first time he had made love to her. Bill had left first around dawn. He went to Galen's to make sure the place wasn't being staked out, then called to give them the all clear. Galen had already told Jamie she was going to have to ride the last few miles to his house in the trunk to make sure no one saw her with him, just in case. He wouldn't relax until he had her safely at home. As soon as the garage door closed, Galen let Jamie out of the trunk. Once inside, he reset the alarms and checked to make sure everything was working properly. His brother not only had all the windows replaced as he instructed, but had cleaned the place up as well. The police had already cleared out the dead body from his garage, and the other two men had either escaped or were taken into custody. The garage steps had been replaced to get rid of the blood stains, and he could see that the living room floor had been sanded and resurfaced with a high-gloss polymer glaze. He didn't want to waste another minute. He had Jamie safely home, and now he would show her just how much he loved her. He grabbed her hand, half running, pulling her up the stairs with him to his room. Galen felt relaxed. He knew he could keep Jamie safe from any harm in his home. They were soon making wild love. Once done, they took a quick shower, then fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. 2 weeks later, Jamie was again testifying in the trial of the men who had been involved in Judge Templeton's murder. The judge had arranged for 2 members of a film crew to set up a live video feed from Galen's house where Jamie would give her testimony. It had been real cloak and dagger stuff from the day the film crew arrived. They had brought them to Galen's in the back of a transport van. Charles was the driver, and he had driven around the city for almost 40 minutes before actually heading to Galen's in case either of the men were trying to memorize the direction he was taking. Once there, they were ushered into the house, and down to the basement where Bill and Galen had set up the area where Jamie would give her testimony. They had draped a dark blue sheet against the back wall so nothing could be seen other than Jamie herself. In all, there had been 14 arrests in all dealing with the murder of Judge Templeton. After Judge Reynolds had viewed the tape Charles had taken him, he issued 8 arrest warrants for all the men in on the videotape. He had known every one of them. Within an hour of his viewing the tape, they had been picked up and booked. By the time his investigation was through, he had 6 more men from both the Justice Department and DEA arrested that were involved. 2 of the men were high-ranking officers in both branches that had been arrested at the airport trying to leave the country. He was confident they had arrested all those involved, but would issue an ongoing investigation into the murder and the corrupt officials. When they had made the arrangements for Jamie to testify from a live video feed, the judge suggested that Jamie stay in hiding until he was positive they had everyone involved. He said he would get in touch with them through their friend Charles if he needed anything more from Jamie, or when he found out if they had indeed gotten all those involved in the murder. The live feed went off without a hitch. The judge reminded Jamie that she was still under oath, then she gave her testimony. The defense lawyer tried his best to get the judge not to allow the video that Charles' men had taped be played for the jury, but he denied his motion. When the trial was over weeks later, all the men had been found guilty of murder, conspiracy to murder, drug trafficking, accomplices to murder, and the list went on and on. Jamie and Galen had been hiding out for almost a year before the judge felt it was safe for her to go back to trying to live a normal life. Galen whisked her off to Hawaii, where he had a home there as well. His family and some close friends, including Bill, and all the men who had worked for him, had been flown to the islands to celebrate in the wedding of Galen and Jamie. The judge had been true to his word, making sure that all those involved with keeping Jamie safe were paid very handsomely from the Justice Department and the DEA as well. Galen hadn't asked to be compensated, but the judge made sure. He was even making sure the men had been paid more than the bill was for that he had received from Charles. He felt they deserved more because it was members from our own government that had tried to silence her. He had been honored when Jamie and Galen had asked him to marry them. He quickly agreed, telling them he would love a vacation in Hawaii. "I do," Galen said, smiling down on his bride. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride, Galen." Galen kissed Jamie tenderly amid all the whoops and howls from his friends and family. He looked deep into Jamie's eyes. "I love you, Mrs. Smithers. And I love you, Mr. Smithers." Then turned to their guests, greeting them all as they walked down the aisle ready to start their lives together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.